This week on Inside Olympia, now that Washington's elections are certified, what went well? Where is there room for improvement? We asked Secretary of State Steve Hobbs. Plus, Jilma Meneses, the outgoing Secretary of the Department of Social and Health Services, reflects on her tenure, her accomplishments, and the work her successor faces.
From the TVW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
And welcome to Inside Olympia. A new governor is about to take office, and that means lots of changes at the top of state agencies. In our second half, we'll talk with the outgoing Secretary of the Department of Social and Health Services about her tenure. But we begin this hour with a post-mortem on the 2024 election in Washington state. What went well? What could have gone better? What are the ongoing challenges facing election officials in the state? Joining me now is Secretary of State Steve Hobbs. Good to see you. It's been a while.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
So there's all of the anticipation leading up to an election, especially one as polarized as this one, and then there's sort of the reality of what happened. We certainly did not have a disputed outcome as we did 4 years ago. I don't think we saw the types of threats against election officials we did 4 years ago, but help us understand kind of what you were preparing for and then what actually happened.
Right. The elections went fairly well. There were some challenges and some slight disappointments. For example, our turnout was better than 2016, but not as good as 2020.
It dropped below 80%.
It did, but not by much, 78.95%. But some of the good things that happened, we increased registered voters, right? So we hit the $5 million registered voters, and 84% of the eligible voters are actually registered votes. So there's some good things in there. You know, there were some major problems with security in terms of people blowing up drop boxes that happened. We've had some cybersecurity threats where counties got hit with cyber. In fact, multiple counties got hit with their the court system got hit. And of course, the year before that, we had another county got taken offline for about 100 hours. Mis and disinformation occurring at both the domestic level and at the nation-state level. And so we're constantly on pins and needles and trying to update our laws and get ahead of any particular threat that comes out in the future. In
terms of, let's talk about disinformation campaigns coming from places like Russia. Did this country see more of that this election than in the past? What's the trend line?
So we saw more of it, and nation-state actors are a lot more open about it. The Director of National Intelligence had declared, look, the Russians are going to do this. China and Russia, Iran, and violent extremist groups. They don't hide the fact that they do stuff like this. We use Logically AI to scan social media to see false narratives that come about. But also sometimes we'll see a nation-state actor play in, and that we did find one of that, and that is just notified and reported to Homeland Security whenever that happens.
Okay, so just to clarify for that, so when is there, if it's domestic, what triggers the report?
What happens is if we see a false narrative happen. So, for example, let's say we have a bunch of people and it's trending on social media and it's hit maybe a critical mass where people are saying, look, the elections are being hacked. Then we would turn around and go, okay, well, we know that's not true because the tabulation machines are not connected to the internet. So we're going to put our own social media out. We're going to work with our 39 counties. We're going to work with our partners, such as the League of Women's Voters, the different political parties to correct the false
narrative. Did you have to do that this time?
We did have to do that. There was a YouTube video being ran about in King County. They had a system there where you can go online and change and create a ballot, right? But the problem was this YouTube video was showing, okay, I'm going to put in this fake name and fake address. I'm going to print out a ballot, but they didn't take it the next step, which was, okay, try to mail in that ballot because guess what? There's no signature, so that ballot's going to be rejected.
Yeah. So the suggestion was, you can fake a ballot, send it in, and get it to count. Well, you
That
can fake
was-
a ballot,
right.
but it's not going to count.
Right. And that person probably just didn't know the system, right? And
You don't
so
think
we
it
got
was
to-
a nefarious?
I don't think it was
necessarily
nefarious, you know.
Did you just say a moment ago that there's a scenario when you would report something to the Department of Homeland Security?
Yes, if we see something that is perhaps driven by a nation-state actor, then we report that to Homeland Security.
Now, since the last presidential election, social media companies have changed their business models. They've changed their algorithms. They are promoting news less than they used to. Did that change the coin of the realm in terms of, so there might be more activity by Russia, China, Iran, but were they getting less traction because the algorithms weren't feeding it? Or what did you guys notice?
I mean, that could be a part of it. I also think that we, as secretaries of state and elections officials, have changed the way we put out information about elections. Like in the past, we're really good about saying, hey, don't forget to vote. Don't forget to put your ballot in the drop box. But we were really bad about telling people, hey, did you know that every signature is checked? Did you know you can go to your elections center and actually view the process? Did you know about ERIC, which is the Electronic Registration Information Center, that if you go to another state and register there, we're going to know about it. If people pass away, we know about that. So we have done more of that where we really didn't do that in the past.
What do you think would have happened if the results had been reversed and Vice President Harris had won?
I think because there's a high percentage more on the Republican side of believing the elections are not good or they lack integrity, I think you probably would have had a pushback on that. That's why we've got to do our part to talk about elections. And keep in mind the Democrats were the same way during the Al Gore, Al versus Bush. And Democrats had doubts about elections. So we just got to work on talking about the story, the narrative of what happens to your ballot.
Is there any part of you that thinks that the crisis has passed and that we've worked through as a country the worst of the mistrust
I don't.
and misinformation?
I don't. And the reason is because now, unlike what happened, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, is now we're dealing with nation-state actors that purposely will try to disrupt our elections all the way down to the local level. And so we as Secretary of State have to come together to come up with new procedures to get ahead of this. We're constantly in contact with Homeland Security and the FBI and CISA. We have classified briefings so that we know what the oncoming threats are. I mean, let's not forget in New Hampshire there was a robocall, and that was a deepfake. Now that was domestically done, but that can certainly be done by a nation-state actor.
Well, and so you raised the issue of AI. Many states, including ours, I believe, have passed laws to address election-related deepfakes. To my knowledge, we did not have an instance here. Is that right? This time around?
Yes.
Okay. But what is that does add a new element here, right? What are you thinking about? What are you preparing for? How does AI potentially change the scenario going forward?
Right. It's a big threat because you can have another instance of a robocall. In fact, if you had the technology and the resources to do this, you could have a legislator who does a electronic town hall, which they do, which I did when I was a legislator, and you'll hear him on the phone, and it's like, yeah, this sounds like Senator Hobbs, but it isn't Senator Hobbs. It's an AI-generated voice, and there's somebody who's getting this information and putting out false information, and that could be a threat. That's why I hope that social media companies will be held accountable. We tried to pass a law. We were successful passing a law, the first step, but it really didn't go far enough. I wanted to go far enough. We need to hold social media companies accountable. Let's hope the federal government will do something about that.
I want to go back to those Dropbox fires in Vancouver, Washington. And I think there was one. Was there one across the river
There
in
was,
Portland?
in Oregon,
What do you know about what the device was, and what's the update on the investigation into trying to track down the person who did that?
So far, it's an ongoing investigation.
Nobody's been arrested.
No one's been arrested. I know they're still searching for this individual. I think what was disconcerting is the fact that this person used a device to burn through the shell of the drop box using potentially thermite or some other accelerant, and to penetrate the drop box and to obviously burn up the ballot. So
to be clear, this wasn't something that was dropped in the slot.
right,
It
burned through.
And we don't know what motivated, obviously. I mean, did he leave a message behind or any sort of?
The first one he did, it had to do with Palestine.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what? Since we are both states are vote by mail states, what opportunities are there to sort of further harden those drop boxes?
So we are proposing from next year to make recommendations for our counties to have drop boxes that are more resilient. We do offer grant funding so they can obviously access that, so they can do that. So perhaps maybe a thicker steel or maybe some other metal that's resistant. Also, in Oregon, they had an extinguisher that was able to put out the fire.
That's internal to the box?
Yes, it was
Interesting.
able to put it out. Now, keep in mind, if it's thermite, right, it has to be an extinguisher that takes oxygen out. Just pouring water on it or just a chemical extinguisher, it's not going to work.
Interesting. The ballots, what's your understanding of, there were quite a few ballots in that Vancouver box. Were all of them able to be, if not recovered, identify the voter and then let them know in time?
Most of the ones that were destroyed, we felt, it's hard to tell with 100% because if the ballot's destroyed, it's destroyed. It's unrecognizable. That we were able to put out the word in the community where people use that drop box, let them know that you can print out a ballot, you can go to your county courthouse to get a new ballot, and we put out that message right away.
So they weren't in, these ballots were not in a condition where you could figure out who they were. They were destroyed.
Some of them were. No, some of them
but then
were
some were-
identifiable, yes.
So let's take it to the next step. Presumably somebody drops off their ballot, it doesn't get burned up, it gets turned into the local auditor, and then there's this signature check process.
Yes.
That seems to perhaps be increasingly complicated by the fact that this new generation of voters is coming online. They don't necessarily, I mean, I'm projecting here, but maybe don't have the cursive skills that I was raised with, but there seems to be some issues matching signatures. And there was a recent audit, or a not too distant from, not too in the distant past audit, that found that there seemed to be just some disproportionality about the signatures being flagged. If I remember correctly, it was African Americans, it was younger people. And so what is the status of trying to figure out what's going on here?
Yeah, so what we did with that study is we said, okay, we know this is happening, but why is it happening and how can we fix it? And so the legislature, along with us, gave an additional study, more work, to the University of Washington, the Evans School, to figure out, okay, what's the next step? How do we deal with this? In the meantime, because we didn't want to just wait for the report, we instituted the ability for voters to sign up for text messaging. Because part of the problem is you don't know if your ballot got rejected. You might get something in the mail, but maybe it's too late, or you don't check the mail, you think it's junk mail. And so voters, and they can do it right now, they can go to vote.gov and sign up for text messaging. And a lot of the newer voters, newly registered since we went online with this program, they're already doing it. Though existing voters need to go back on vote.gov and opt into the program. But what's great is if you receive notice, you'll receive notice right away when your ballot has been rejected, and you can take action right away.
What is the process then to confirm if somebody's, what would they do? Go in person and sign in front of somebody? And see if it
So
matches?
a lot of times the county will send you a form, and you have to re-sign the form. You can go into the county. Now, what we're planning on doing is doing a pilot project where you can actually cure your ballot using your cell phone. However, We just got to make sure that's going to be secure, and which county are we going to use this pilot program for.
Would that be using, like, I know some states are now allowing people to have their driver's licenses on their phones, it's sort of a secure technology, encrypted, but have your ID on your phone and use that. Is that the technology?
We're just talking right now about the signature itself. We haven't got to that.
So you could, where you'd actually sign and then like take a picture of it or FaceTime or something?
There's actually some states where you can just do the signature on your phone. Using your
interesting.
Finger, yeah.
Okay.
Just like when you go to a grocery store, sometimes you can just sign.
Right.
Like that.
So is there, going forward, are there new technologies or new ways besides just a signature of somehow verifying the identity of the person who's mailed in a ballot? Like, are there new ways of doing this? I don't know. Just will we always be matching signatures?
Well, probably, because we want to keep paper. We want to have a paper trail because that's the best way to ensure the security of our elections, the integrity of our elections. I think the next step we'll be doing is using AI technology to be able to scan a signature, because right now it's two people who look at your signature, and they look at every signature. But it would be faster, less expensive, to have AI technology scan the signature and be able to quickly, within seconds, well, not even a second, and retrieve the proper signature. And then what we would do, we'd have safeguards, right?
Yeah.
So maybe one out of every 50, one out of every 25 would be checked by a human being, just to make sure.
But that seems like that could be in the future.
Well, it could be in the near future.
Near future.
Yeah.
Like the next election?
Could be the next election.
And would that be
We're still looking at
would that be the kind of thing that's piloted by a couple of counties to see how it works?
That's what we would like to do. And it would lower the cost, too, of some of the elections. And probably the verification would be a little better, too.
What is so let's skip ahead sort of the next part of this, which is then we have the election count. And we do require ballots to be in on election day, but they don't, the count, but they can be postmarked by election day, and then they can filter in days after. So we're this, one of these states that just seems to take a really long time to count. And, if it's not going to decide a national race, maybe it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but certainly we see it in super close. I mean, there's a state Senate race in Southwest Washington that went into recount. Like
Lands commissioner race, too.
Right. So is there anything more that can be done to speed up the count? I guess that's the question.
Well, the problem is you can speed up the count all you want, but if I'm a service member and I'm deployed like I was when I went to Iraq, and I put in my ballot in, and it's postmarked properly, like the day before or whatever, it's going to take a while. And so it doesn't matter how fast you count it. You can't count it till it actually gets there. And to be fair and to be accessible to all people, the system that we have, we're ensuring that, hey, just make sure it's postmarked.
So are we an outlier state in that sense? Are most other states requiring ballots be in on election day, and that's why they can count more quickly?
No, but there's not a lot, because not a lot of states do vote by mail.
Vote by mail, yeah.
I think Minnesota is an example where you have to have your ballot in by that time. I believe Oregon was where you had to have the ballot in the voting center, but I think they have since changed that, because you run into the problem where somebody legitimately, through no fault of their own, couldn't get the ballot in the center, the election center, on the day of the election.
Has there been any talk of allowing the counties to, I know they can prep the ballots to count as they get them, and they can do that signature verification, then I guess when the polls, quote unquote, close, then they can start tabulating, but have we thought about letting them tabulate earlier?
Oh, you mean actually counting it well, the problem is then you have the issue where people are like, oh, you already determined this, or we don't want any more misinformation. And
what about more counts in the night? Because we get one count and then it's done.
Yes, so that is going to be county and county dependent, right? Depending on the resources they have. I mean, maybe we can provide more money for the county to be able to do that, but I think in this tight budget year, probably not going to happen.
What are you, speaking of money, I know it's going to be a tighter budget year for the legislature. What is your office going to be? And we've just gone through a big election, so while we do have odd year elections in the state, you're kind of 2 years out from the next big one, but what might you be asking for of the legislature?
Well, one of the things that we're doing to try to help with this budget process is we looked at the OFM directive of like hiring freezes and critical systems. And so, we're certainly looking at that. Though we do still need to do some expansion of election security because the threat is always ongoing, like I said, from nation-state actors. So we'll be looking at that, ensuring that the counties receive the money that they need to update their systems. The other thing that I would like to continue on is voter outreach and education to disenfranchised communities. Currently, I have one person that is supposed to reach out to communities of color. That is impossible. That can't be done. And so having more folks that can do that, who can represent the community, go out there and talk about elections is key, because the vulnerability can happen where misinformation is directed to these communities where they're not getting the right election information. And so being able to do that in different languages, I know that there's a couple bills from legislators that would like to have voters' guides more available in different languages. And so we'll see how that process goes.
One thing I've heard is that AI is actually pretty good at doing translation. It's a lower risk, if I've been informed correctly, a lower risk application, the kind of thing that states might and could be experimenting with if they're looking for some low risk use cases for AI. Has there been any talk in this elections context of using AI to translate?
I mean,
into
certainly
more
that
languages?
could be an option. The problem is like we have to ensure there's a legal lens to all of this. Also, AI is not perfect.
Right.
We don't want to, create a cultural, miscue from this.
Going back to last session, several bills passed, including one that makes harassing election workers a Class C felony, and it also allows harassed election officials to apply for address confidentiality program, for the address confidentiality program. It wasn't that long ago, 4 years ago, that the director of elections in this state was the victim of a targeting effort.
Yes, and the Secretary
and
of
the
State,
Secretary of
Kim
State.
Wyman.
Both, I believe, were under round-the-clock security for a while. Do you have any sense that change sent a message? Was that law enforced this year, or did you kind of dodge that?
I don't know if that law itself made any impact. I certainly would think that people should know by now that threatening an election worker is the wrong thing to do. I think it's a combination of having stronger laws, but I also think it's a combination of ensuring that we put the right information out about elections so that you have an individual who's not so angry about the elections because they know that it's being checked, it's secure and accessible. I think putting the right information out to change this narrative that some people have about elections not being secure.
I want to just go back briefly to the signature mismatches. One of the other laws that passed from Senator Valdez requires counties to have a standardized program for how they notify somebody of if their signature doesn't mismatch. You mentioned the text message opt-in. I know I write in my phone number, and I presume that means they would call if there was a problem.
Yes, they do call. Some counties call, and they'll definitely send
But just to be clear, if somebody's ballot is being rejected today and across the 39 counties, can they expect to be notified?
Yes, they're very active about it. Our counties are very good at being very aggressive of trying to inform people.
Okay. Just in the couple minutes we have left, what is your sense of especially given your National Guard background? We had the Adjutant General, the new Adjutant General, on this program right before the election. He expressed concern about what was coming. We know that states have put the National Guard on call, on standby, and we certainly know what we saw post the 2020 election. What was your anxiety level? What going into this election? What were you hearing and thinking?
So my anxiety level is always high when it comes to elections, just because it's the nature of the job. The fact that elections have changed, the threats have changed to elections, because now we're dealing, again, with nation-state actors. That changes the dynamics greatly, because now not only do you have to think inward, of servicing your constituency, the citizens of the state, but now you got to think outward. And you have to take a whole of government approach on dealing with these threats. So states and even counties can't do it alone. They have to look to other partners, federal partners, CISA, FBI, Homeland Security, and also private sector partners, those that, service our computers and our networks. So really it's a whole of government approach to deal with it, which complicates the issue, but that doesn't mean that we should, just kind of, rub our hands and go, oh, this is horrible. We've got to think this through and trying to be ahead of the next threat.
A couple of years ago, you and I were talking about Albert sensors, which are these devices that counties can put on their systems. Again, election systems are disconnected from the internet, but to the extent that somebody might be trying to hack in and mess with the voter rolls or something, the Albert sensor was a device that would alert a county. And there were a few conservative counties, a handful, in eastern Washington who didn't want anything to do with this.
Right.
What's the status of that?
So there were 3 counties. 2 of them are going to go to the Albert sensor. One is not being resistant. They're having they have a different detection device, but the problem is that detection device is not going to notify Homeland Security. And we have to be one team about this. We are all under threat. If one county gets exploited, then everyone will think that the elections are thrown. Doesn't matter where you're at. And so we'll try to push some more legislation. We'll also try to appeal to that county and try to provide any funding. The state will help out. There's other issues that we're trying to deal with. Like there are some counties that don't have a .gov. They have a .com or a .org. And we're trying to change that as well to provide greater security for our elections.
Are you prepared to mandate the Albert sensor if you can't get cooperation?
We don't want to mandate it because what if there's a different sensor that's better? So I think what we do is, right now as the law states, you have to have a detection device, right? So that is the letter of the law. I think the next step is to go, okay, well, here's the recommendation of what you should do, one that actually communicates with Homeland Security. It provides greater security of your elections depending on what technology is available. And so we'll probably word it in such a way where we will be able to do through rulemaking say this is the sensor you got to have.
Okay. Just very lastly, there are still people who think we should go back to voting at the polls, who don't think vote by mail is secure. This didn't loom as large this year as it did 4 years ago. What's your bottom line about Washington elections, their integrity, and the way we do it here?
Look, if you have any doubts whatsoever, then all you got to do is go contact your county auditor and go find out. See for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it, maybe because you don't like it, me because I'm a Democrat. But your local county auditor, who's more tied to your community, they'll tell you what's going on. And you can do that. And we can't, if we go back to poll voting, we have a huge state. We've got 5 million voters. People complain now how long it takes to count the ballot. It'll take way longer if we have to bring in people. And on top of that, it's hard to get people to work in elections anymore. I mean, it's a tight labor market. What we need to do is stick to the system that we got, provide the securities that we can get ahead, using technology, providing more funding for counties to allow people to vote from home if they need to do that.
One quick last question. Are you going to be running a bill in 2025 to make your office nonpartisan?
I won't, but I don't. If someone wants to do it, that's fine.
You're okay with that idea?
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, thanks for the conversation. Good to see you.
Thank you.
When we return, she's helmed the Department of Social and Health Services for the past 3 years. Now she's preparing to hand over the reins. Our exit interview with the outgoing secretary is next.
Watch all of TVW's award-winning shows on your time at tvw.org.
And welcome back to Inside Olympia. The Department of Social and Health Services is Washington's largest state agency with approximately 17,000 employees. It serves more than 2 million Washingtonians a year. My next guest has helmed this agency for the past 3 years and is now preparing to step down as Governor-elect Bob Ferguson takes office. Joining me now to reflect on her tenure and the work she's done at DSHS as its secretary is Jilma Meneses. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good seeing you.
Congratulations on what is now going to be soon the end of a 3-year tenure at helming this large agency. I distinctly remember our first conversation when you were brand new to this. As you sit here 3 years later, what's sort of a big picture thought or takeaway, especially compared to what you maybe were thinking or knew 3 years ago, kind of then and now. What's an observation you have?
An observation is that at the time I wondered, are we going to accomplish as much as I'd like to accomplish in the next 3 years?
Because you're steering the ship of state government. It doesn't move
Right.
fast.
Absolutely. And despite the fact that I think there's so much more to do, I think we've accomplished an immense amount and made a difference for Washingtonians and certainly for the patients and clients that we serve.
How do you make progress in an agency of this size and scope? What is the secret sauce to coming in? And you have to get ramped up and get to know the agency. You have to get to know the people. You have to, so many moving parts. What are some strategies that you brought to bear to do this?
Yeah, first it starts with grace, but more importantly probably is bold leadership and courage. And when someone says, no, we can't do it that way, we say, why not?
Interrogate the no.
Exactly, interrogate the no. Or if they say, well, sure, we can do it. It's going to be about a 3-year, 4-year.
And cost you this much
and
money.
cost you this much
And
money.
you're going to have to go ask the
Then you have to-
legislature.
yes, and then you have to challenge it. You say, why would it take that long? And show me the plan. And maybe there's a different way. Yes, and that's what we've done in the last 3 years. We've made a significant progress that would otherwise have taken much longer had we not been asking the right questions.
There's so many divisions within DSHS, one can hardly keep track of them. And then within that, you've got to sort of prioritize where to put time, energy, and effort. So as you came in and took a look at the agency and saw this very broad portfolio and all of these vulnerable clients and communities it serves, how did you prioritize? How did you decide, here's where we're going to apply some focus and energy?
Yes, well, and you are right. It's hard to prioritize. Some of our clients move between the different administrations at DSHS for services depending on their needs. But when I started, one of the main priorities was behavioral health.
Because the state was in the midst of a crisis, in the midst of lawsuits, in the midst of, it's kind of a mess.
Absolutely, and it had been so for 10 years or so. And we were being fined by the federal court in a matter called Trueblood because patients were waiting in jail for competency services, and we were not able to deliver. We didn't have enough beds. We didn't have a treatment model that was able to accommodate the people waiting.
So that was what was on fire when you arrived.
That was on fire.
Yeah. So let's start with that. Because now, 3 years later, you can, and I remember the last time we talked about this, you were able to report progress. What can you report 3 years later?
We are in compliance. People are no longer waiting more than 7 days. Sometimes they only wait 1 or 2 days, but definitely not more than 7 days, which is the compliance threshold. Whereas before, thousands of people have been waiting at times.
And
now
far
0.
beyond what the court had determined was the acceptable waiting period.
Right. Now we have 0 waiting over 7 days. We're in compliance. People are receiving the services, the treatment that they so deserve under the Constitution.
And you've been able to maintain that. It isn't like, oh, we're in compliance for a week and now.
That's right. We've been able to maintain it since about February or so of 2024, after we opened Olympic Heritage in October of 23.
Well, let's talk a little bit, explain kind of the pressure points here, because what you needed to do to get people out of jails more quickly was expand bed capacity for forensic patients, but that meant sort of pushing civil patients out of the state hospitals, and then they need somewhere to go. So tell us a little bit about the capacity that you all had to build, what had to be stood up in order to start to meet these mandatory court-ordered timelines.
So a lot of our civil patients were taking up forensic beds. Therefore, as you mentioned, people waiting for forensic beds in jails didn't have a place to go. So we started working more diligently, not only in the admissions process and the evaluation by hiring evaluators from all over the country to do virtual telehealth with these folks.
Just to be clear, this is the evaluations for people who are in jail?
Correct.
So you didn't actually because part of the issue is they were waiting even for the evaluation, and you determined you didn't actually have to have somebody go to the jail. You could do this remotely.
Many of the evaluations could be done remotely. And so that was one, and it's changing the business practices, obviously. But the bigger part was, again, making room at the hospitals for forensic patients.
Because once the evaluator looks at somebody and says, yeah, they're not competent in their current state to stand trial, then you need to get them into the hospital so they can get restored.
That is correct.
Some effort to
Treatment
restore
starts,
them.
yes, competency restoration begins. So we need a bed. There were no beds. And we had been depleted of beds many years prior due to funding and never caught up. Now, when I started, there were plans for more beds. There were plans for building out beds at other facilities.
Right.
But that takes years.
The governor had talked about this 5-year plan to build these 16-bed facilities all over the state and move the civil patients out of the state hospitals.
Yes, and we were doing that. But 16 beds here, 16 beds there in the future doesn't exactly make a dent very quickly. Or the 350-bed hospital that is in construction is going to take a while.
Right.
So when we learned that a facility was being vacated in Tukwila by its owner, we jumped at the chance. We purchased that facility, and the prior owner had a behavioral health facility there. They cleared their facility. We bought the building, converted it to ours, renovated it. Luckily, we were able to get emergency funding from the legislature. And so we were able to get emergency funding from the legislature. We were able to renovate it. We were able to populate it with the equipment and operations equipment that we needed and staff it, which is over 100 people, and in 2 months. And then we brought patients, civil patients, over in October of 23, and we had started this project in August of 23.
Wow. And so
Yes.
now you're serving more than 70 patients in that facility.
Yes, and the hospital has approximately a room for about 129 beds, but the remaining beds beyond the 72 or so were given to Healthcare Authority for diversion programs. Nonetheless, the 72 that we received were opened, and that has made a tremendous difference, along with opening up other facilities, the 16-bed cottages at other places at Maple Lane and so on. But that one in particular made a difference. So by February of 24, we had 0 over 7 days.
Waiting for, again,
Right.
the competency
That made a huge
services.
difference.
How did you staff this facility in light of what we know are ongoing workforce shortages in this area?
It's a national workforce shortage, not just here in the state of Washington, but nationally, particularly in healthcare. But we were very tenacious. We had on-site hiring, meaning we invited everybody that could be hired to come to our job fair. We used every part of social media that you can think of and beyond, big campaign. And we invited them to come and interview on site. We made conditional offers, meaning if they looked promising, then we said, okay, we will hire you on the condition that you pass a background check, for example, and
Right.
certification checks, if certifications or licensure were required,
Yeah.
for example. And surely we made over 100 hires in a week.
Really? Did you get any people coming over from the previous facility?
Yes, many of them, all of them were invited to come
in
and
and-
interview. Absolutely, and many of them got hired, thankfully.
I know that there are advocates in the community who've been concerned that civil patients aren't getting the services they need or won't get the services they need, or the bed capacity won't be there because the state is having to prioritize the forensic patients because of the True Blood decision. What can you say about, obviously you've built capacity here. Is it enough capacity? If a civil patient needs a bed today in this state, can they get a bed?
Not always. There's a big demand for behavioral health services in the civil side as well as the forensic side. So we're also filling civil beds at ALTSA, the Aging and Long-Term Care Administration opens up beds as well as the Developmental Disabilities Administration under DSHS. We both fill beds when the patient is eligible for those services from the civil side. And Healthcare Authority, luckily, is also building beds in the community with various providers through contracts. So there are a lot of civil beds coming up online. Nonetheless, is it enough for the demand that is coming our way? I don't think so. I think that there is a major demand for behavioral health services in this country, and certainly in the state of Washington, for both the civil and the forensic side.
So what would your message be? You are leaving this position, but going into a legislative session when you know that budgets are going to be tighter, but also because you've got some momentum here. What is your message to state legislators, to budget writers, when it comes to especially the civil capacity?
You have to prioritize the humans that need care. And these are humans that need care.
And while we're building more beds and those 16-bed facilities, I mean, that's still going forward. When you look at the numbers, we're not building enough capacity to meet the need, the future need, the current or the future need.
I would agree, yes. I think that we're close, but we're not building enough. And again, in the community perhaps, and in the state-run facilities. And a lot of the community providers don't want our patients from the state because they're very challenging human
complex,
beings
yes.
with a lot of complex needs. And so the providers are not perhaps equipped to take that responsibility.
I'm glad you reminded us of that, because this idea that, oh, well, we have these contracted providers, they're picking up the slack. I've heard the same thing.
They can't.
They'll pick and choose based on what they think they can manage.
Exactly.
The state's going to have to be the backstop
That's
for the
correct.
most difficult,
That's
most
correct.
complex.
That is correct.
Yeah.
So it can't be one or the other. It has to be both. It has to be a good balance. But for a long time, the DSHS beds, again, they were less than adequate.
Right.
Because many of those beds went to Healthcare Authority to build in the community, which is understandable.
Yeah.
People just, made the best decisions they could with the information they had. I would suggest that you cannot starve one or the other. You really have to build up both sides.
Yep. Another part of this 5-year transformation that the governor announced now more than 5 years ago was to build a new forensic hospital of excellence on the campus of Western State Hospital. Their ground has now been broken on this.
Yes.
To help us understand the significance of that and what the timeline looks like, what's going on there.
Yes, well, that's not scheduled to open until 27. And yes, we broke ground. It's going to be a fabulous facility with state-of-the-art equipment, state-of-the-art methodologies to treat people, spaces that are conducive to treatment with dignity and care and respect for the humans that populate it. And unlike the hospitals that were built 100 years ago.
And
these
literally 100 years ago.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
These are beautiful spaces. And in actual, most of our cottages that we have built, and that we are building, Brockman, Maple Lane, others.
That are around
Oak,
the state,
that are around the
not
state
at
now
Western State.
are
Yeah.
of that nature. They
More
have,
therapeutic.
They're very therapeutic with beautiful colors and equipment and spaces that are conducive to good treatment and treatment with dignity and respect. Again, unlike what people used to build in 100+ years ago.
So I've been to Western State Hospital. I've been in the 100-year-old building. It's something out of the movies. To be clear, when the new hospital is complete, is the idea that patients will be moved and that old building will be decommissioned, or is this add-on capacity?
This is some parts of Western State Hospital have already been, some of the buildings have already been torn down. And so portions of it will be decommissioned. A big portion will go to the new hospital, especially as demand increases. And hopefully by then, capital monies will be available to renovate those sections that are still antiquated.
Got it. So then you could move people out and then go back in and perhaps rehabilitate the existing 100-year-old building and make it
Correct.
work for, okay. So, and remind us of what kind of capacity this is going to add. Do you recall the beds?
This is going to, well, the 350-bed house.
350, okay. And that's a game changer.
It is definitely a game changer, absolutely. Now, again, right now we're meeting capacity with what we have with Olympic Heritage and the others, but that demand is growing day by day as the behavioral health system implodes.
There's also been a lack of beds for children
Yes.
in mental health crisis. And, that Children's Hospital in Seattle ends up taking on the brunt of that, and then they fill up and there's nowhere for kids to go. Parents are anguished because there's not a good option for their kids. What is the status of trying to build more beds for kids?
Yes, well, I am so pleased to tell you that when I met with the CEO, Dr. Jeff Spearing from Seattle Children's, he explained his dilemma. That was back in February of 24, almost a year ago, right? He explained his dilemma, and within days, I had a solution for him. I said, let's open up a facility for youth who are waiting in hospitals with multi-diagnosis. And he said, can we do that? I said, absolutely we can if we do it together. And so
because that was the issue, right? Is he would
Yes.
have patients ready to go who don't need to, they're not in acute state, that don't need to be in his hospital, but there's nowhere to put them
There was
because they
nowhere
can't
to
just
put-
go back home.
Absolutely, and some of them had
And then there's kids who need to get in that he doesn't have room for.
correct.
Yeah.
And some of them had other diagnoses that just regular facilities, behavioral health facilities in the community couldn't deal with,
Yeah.
including developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, other matters,
Right.
right? So long story short is that Dr. Spearing and I, and also with the assistance of DCYF, we obtained funding to open up a new facility called the Lake Berrien facility, and it was also a partnership with Multicare. And in a few months, we opened up Lake Berrien, and a few months after that, we started populating this facility for those specific children. It's a small facility at the moment, but it hopefully will grow as funding is available, because the need, again, the need for the youth, just like for the adults, is critical. And the sooner we start treating an individual in their youth, the better off they will be in their adult years. So I hope that project also expands.
Yeah, so what are the expansion opportunities? And again, as you think about the budget writers and what they need to know going forward, this problem is not solved. You were able
Right.
to alleviate a little bit of the pain point, but let's be really honest and candid here. What more is going to be needed to address this crisis with the kids?
Yes, many more facilities throughout the state need to be built, and providers and the state have to partner together. And providers not only meaning private behavioral health systems, but also the hospitals, as we did with Seattle Children's and Multicare. They have to continue being built and or opened. We are leasing 2 cottages from Multicare to do exactly this work, but we're only populating 1 cottage until such time that the state has enough funding to
To do
have
the other
2.
one. So you actually have like the physical building is
Exactly.
identified, but you don't have the funding to
Not
do it.
yet, no. And this coming biennium, it's going to be a tough one, because the budget forecast is
Right.
challenging. So we'll be fortunate if we can obtain funding for the 1 cottage to continue the 1 cottage. Hopefully in the future, DSHS will open the 2nd cottage, and hopefully after that, again, other facilities open with other providers, because it's very much needed. The youth are needing this.
Let's just take a quick detour because you mentioned the current state of the budget. The governor has ordered state agencies to freeze spending for the moment. What are the impacts for DSHS when that happens?
It impacts everybody, but definitely at DSHS, one of the things that we've done is we froze hires. We're not laying people off. We're not closing down services. We're not eliminating services to our providers that we contract with. Right now, we are only freezing certain positions that are not critical. There are some exempt positions that we will continue to hire. For example, nurses at these facilities that we just talked about, or caregivers, or psychiatrists, et cetera, physicians. We will continue to hire those critical positions, especially in the clinical setting. But we have frozen others that are not critical to serving Washingtonians.
Any other sort of things you have to do when the governor says hold the line on spending that has sort of an effect on the end user, the client?
At the moment, other than freezing travel, freezing hires, freezing purchases of large equipment, we've halted, right? We're
Right.
not doing, now again, we have systems that we wanted to bring on this year, particularly in the technologies and digital space, that we might have to pause as a result of the spending problem. or the budget problem, I should say. But, and that will affect or delay some of the things that we want to do or accomplish with delivering services. But I trust that hopefully in the future that'll change.
I want to go back to Western State Hospital for a moment. What is the status of federal accreditation?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, Olympic Heritage will hopefully be accredited by the Joint Commission in the next few months. We're applying. We've been preparing for that for quite some time now.
Would that free up some federal money to help?
Yes,
fund
that
it?
hopefully will, depending on what the new federal administration says, yes, but that's the goal.
The goal, yeah.
And the goal for the 350-bed hospital is also for it to be joint accredited. And both of those facilities are physically prepared to do that. And also staffing models as well as business and clinical models and so forth. Western State Hospital would need major capital
The existing
improvements.
physical plant, you just don't think you can get
West-
accreditation based on the
right.
way it is today.
The main reason Western State Hospital lost its accreditation to begin with is because the building is so antiquated. It's not about the clinical care.
Right.
It's not about the staff. Those people folks working at that facility are excellent at what they do. It was mostly about the physical space, the antiquated space. And that's the reason why the governor chose to support the building of these other facilities.
Okay. I want to click through a couple more things before we run out of time. Just very briefly, the Special Commitment Center on McNeil Island. It's sort of been a thorn in the side, I think, of every DSHS secretary. It's a tough one. But what's its status at this point?
Well, the status has not changed much, other than they continue to try to bring the best clinical care to the people who live there. Right? These are, again, tough individuals who don't, maybe some of them will never leave the island or that facility. Right. Some of them will, some of them won't.
Do you think legislators should consider moving that population onto the mainland because of the complexity of running an island facility?
I think it's a political question. There are many people on the mainland who prefer those individuals stay on the island. I think it is complex to travel to the island, but it actually works very well.
Okay. The Economic Justice Alliance, a 10-year plan to dismantle poverty. What is it? Is it just that? And if so, how do you do it in 10 years?
We have, the plan encompasses bringing different funding solutions to people in poverty, among other things. And as
These are your clients.
These are clients and people working in the state, or living in the state of Washington, who are living below poverty levels, some homeless or houseless. And anyhow, as a result of the 10-year plan and the Economic Justice Alliance work, much of that work was done with people living in poverty, with direct experience with poverty. As a result of the work, we have reduced poverty significantly in the state of Washington, probably more so than any state in the country. This is the excellent work of our team here at DSHS, as well as partnering with other agencies that belong to it.
Why are you not going to continue in this role? Why not? Did you ask Governor-elect Ferguson, hey, you want me to stay on? What happened here?
Thank you for asking. When I took the role 3 years ago, I had no presumption that the new governor would necessarily want my services. And I am a service-oriented female, Latina, with her own lived experience, who wants to continue serving people, particularly people who are marginalized, people who have the needs that perhaps privileged folks don't have. And so when I took this job, I figured it would be for the term that Jay Inslee had left. And then I would hopefully continue my work in another capacity, hopefully with a non-governmental entity, and that's exactly what I'm doing. And I'll be president and CEO of one of the major NGOs in the state of Washington.
Congratulations. We are out of time. I do want to note that one of the other things that you accomplished was rebranding DSHS for the first time in ever, maybe decades. And so we're going to leave you with an image of the new branded logo for DSHS. I'm told that this helped the agency move away from quote unquote patronizing language and an outdated, unfriendly logo to a new inclusive logo. I think inclusion is your middle name
Absolutely. And
So-
we interviewed over 4,000 people
to
in
get
this,
to do this.
to change our brand overall. Absolutely.
I'm going to
Thank
stop you there. Thank you for your time. Good luck in your next chapter, and appreciate the interview.
Thank you.
Good to see you, and thank you for watching Inside Olympia. We'll see you again next week.